Please welcome Jonathan Zittrain.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you for the pioneering work you are doing within our library communities on so many fronts. And thank you, Leah, for pulling together this amazing gathering of people. I've had people asking me, oh, you know, what are you doing on Friday? And my exciting social answer is, I'll be at a symposium on link rot. And there is some ways in which the popularity of The Walking Dead has them say, go on. And then when I explain it more, many of them are like, that's not The Walking Dead at all. And then they aren't curious anymore. But the fact that we have a room full of people here and virtually online, greetings to those of you using Fuse, that are concerned about this is a very heartening sign, because I think it's a very real problem. And it touches on a number of the dilemmas we face in the wonderful digital space that we have, that has expanded as much as it has because it is distributed and there's no main gatekeeper, CEO, or main menu to it, but that distributedness can mean the eggs may be safely all out of one basket, but if it's 10 o'clock, do you know where all your eggs are? The answer is surely no. Fort Knox has something to recommend it if you want to know all at once where stuff is. So what I thought I would do today is talk pretty broadly about the kinds of issues that I think libraries in particular, and academic libraries in particular face, and how that can spiral into seeing the issue of Lincoln reference rot as one of the core problems of our time for which we may actually be able to offer a solution. I'm very aware of the Mark Twain quote that everybody's always talking about the weather, but nobody ever does anything about it. And I'm pleased that among the people here today are folks who are actually doing something about the problems in the digital space. That includes Ed Walters from Fastcase and Herbert von de Sampel. So many folks that are really working on fixing the problems that we see, and in ways that I think themselves can turn out to be distributed. So that's kind of the frame of what I was hoping to talk about. And I guess to start at the beginning, this I think is the first regular academic journal. This is Philtrans A from Britain circa 1665, and kind of encapsulates the idea that it's all well and good to have a good thought, but it would be helpful to write it down. And not only that, but helpful to write it down and put it in something labeled as like good thoughts or deep thoughts by Jack Handey. It's like you've got a volume that you know has some form of vetting to what's in it, and then maybe could be found in regularized places like libraries. So this is a classic Oxonian style library, built, I think, not uncoincidentally as a kind of fortress. You know, it's ready for the coming bad years, so that if civilization should fall apart, there's just a small portcullis they can lower, and in the basement they can hang out for a while, and they have rations indexed along with the books to just wait it out, and then at the end can emerge. Well, that's me hearing me on Fuse, while the terribly embarrassed fellow in the front row is figuring out how to turn off his iPad. If you break it over your knee, I found that can often, yeah, very good. But I digress. So you end up ready to emerge and to treat society to the rebuilding it no doubt surely deserves, beginning with Philtrans A. Let's just get started with Newtonian physics. But that kind of mission is extremely important. Here's the Harvard depository, for which it exists in wedges. I guess when you build depositories, there always might be more that you need. So kind of like a modular board where you can always stick in a new expansion card. This is built out in western Massachusetts so that we can always just build another wedge, which I worry makes us save everything, because what the heck, we can always re-wedge it if we need to. This is not a browsing library, as you might guess. I think this is a sort of robot-centric zone, but you can make your request and dig out of the archives what you need. It's just to think of the library function as basically being this form of mere archive is surely not comprehensive enough to describe the function that libraries have served and should be serving in the future. I know Brewster, whom Michelle mentioned, is doing us one better too, as people are getting rid of their books and like remaindering them at less than $1 a book. I believe he has a bunch of just shipping containers, and he's just kind of pitchforking the books in there for fuel if we ever, no, I mean to be able to read later if we, I got my narratives confused. Okay, so I find myself somewhat skeptical then on the other end of things of thinking of the library of the future as basically a comfortable place, or at least a clean, well-lighted place, in which to have terminals. Both because people have their own terminals, by and large these days, digital divide, still working on that. But maybe it's that the terminals have privileged access to stuff that your terminal wouldn't, because the library has negotiated some kind of deal. And that is a big part now of what libraries are doing. They're a form of trying to bring people together the way that Medicare would negotiate for pharmaceutical drugs, if it were allowed to, using the power of all those buyers. It's just this kind of purchasing can be tricky. It's not clear who has the upper hand in it or not, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I again offer that I think having the library merely be the conduit because it's trying to pool a bunch of people together to get ephemeral access, renting instead of owning, to materials available in proprietary databases elsewhere, I worry is not the best configuration for what ultimately the entire community can do. Of course, another really important function of the library traditionally has been to be able to direct somebody to resources that he or she needs, and to do so in a way that is representing the interests of the patron. Now that normally would go without saying, but as we have seen reference librarians replaced by, for a while, Jeeves, and later there was no reason to anthropomorphize it, it's just Google, and you type something and you get back an answer, to have the answer not able to explain itself, can you imagine the librarian that's like, oh, so I'm looking for such and such a thing, and says, well, I think you should check out this. And you say, oh, why? And they say, because it's most relevant to you. So, well, I appreciate that. What makes you think it's relevant? It's most relevant to you. It has the highest score on what I think you should be looking at. There's a way in which, while respecting the secret sauces of the new librarians, as it were, there may well be a place for principles and practices that can explain themselves and can be aware in a highly qualitative way of what's out there and able to point people to it. So I guess it's no surprise that in talking about the function, say, of a well-functioning modern library, we're talking pretty quickly about values, not just about capabilities or book counts or technologies. And for that, it's worth thinking, like, what is the core purpose of a community of people devoted to preserving things through the mantle of the library or for the educational sector? And there is this exercise they do at business schools called the core purpose exercise, where they dispatch people within a company to a retreat and they do trust falls, and at the end they're like, what is our core purpose? And here are some of the answers. For Cargill, to improve the standard of living around the world. For 3M, to solve unsolved problems innovatively. That sounds pretty good. I can't tell if it's redundant to have an unsolved, well, anyway. Glad I wasn't there. Fannie Mae, to strengthen the social fabric by continually democratizing home ownership. They haven't been on retreat since 2008. They may since want to revise that. My favorite is Nike, though, to experience the emotion of competition winning and crushing competitors, which probably most resembles the mission of the library. Well, maybe not. So what is the core purpose for what I'm describing as those organized around the banner of library, to which I do as a shorthand .edu, the educational sector, but I think this could as easily apply to great pieces of .gov, .org, and of course the top-level domain counterparts internationally that represent people with those zones. And I just offer up 4 bullet points that are sort of what I've been noodling around as I've been thinking about it. A cultivation of scholarly skills, providing access to the world's information, in turn generating information and freely disseminating it. And this last one, maybe a little Nike-esque, contributing actively and fiercely to the development of free information platforms such as the Internet. Because the wonderful thing still today, on the cusp of 2015, about the Internet is that it is a collective hallucination begun from university research and archiving circles and built to embody quite naturally, not self-consciously, the values within them, such as distributedness, openness, not fretting unduly about identity and security, even as these problems have grown and grown as more and more people have gone online and decided this is where they want to do their banking and their twisting and everything else that might be something they'd want to keep quiet. So what I wanted to do was just walk through these areas and offer some ways in which I'm thinking the libraries can contribute. And link and reference rot will turn out to be, again, within the spiral, sort of at the core of what this might be. On cultivation of scholarly skills, I'm not going to say too much except to say that with respect to the academic sector, I think the fact that things are so flattened and non-hierarchical online, and bless that, does mean that the appeal to authority that traditionally has given expertise its added thumb on the scale, its invitation to be on the evening news rather than just some person, and offer an opinion on something grounded in the academic ethos, that is less and less. This is, for what it's worth, Glenn Beck with his chalkboard. And it has a sort of professorial vibe to it, but it's not as if Glenn Beck's chalkboard is the product of peer review or is something for which there's an even exchange. And I can surely find folks on the left that mirror it on the right. It's just that Glenn uses multicolored chalk in a way I've seen no one else do, so I wanted to give him props for that. But the fact is that to be able to have the kind of embrace of neutrality that I think a library tends to have, neutrality, even as neutrality in the postmodern world is sort of an odd concept, but something that says, I know when I'm giving you advice that's meant to serve you and your desire to learn, rather than advice that is serving a sponsor who wants me to recommend a product to you that might be good enough but isn't necessarily what I would say in the absence of the sponsor. Or I have some ideological agenda and I will only direct you to materials that serve my ideological agenda. These are things that libraries, again, I think quite implicitly subscribe to, but that other sources that are meant maybe to have the mantle of academia superficially reflecting back don't. And maintaining those lines and letting people choose aware of what they might be getting differently might be part of what's important about what libraries and the academic sector can still be doing. So access to the world's information. At a time when we would think that the digital revolution, since it makes it so much cheaper to move a bit from here to there, would mean surely it just means the world's information is more and more accessible. It turns out, of course, there's a lot of caveats to that. Back to the depository, this is not that accessible. Now, for materials that are really obscure, they might be important but obscure, and only a handful of researchers want them, this model is pretty good. Or maybe if you're trying to reboot society, you cart everything out at once. But what happens when, for example, we discovered at the Harvard Law Library, we have all American case law from every jurisdiction from its founding as a colony or otherwise in the depository on paper. And what do we do with that? That's an investment of truly tens of millions of dollars over 200 years. And it's funny, like, do you want to keep collecting the stuff in 2014? Or now we've kind of got it through other sources, Ed Walters is working on it, others are working on it. do you want to be the librarian that sent the last book to the archive to repose for a cause that was unclear? Sort of a John Kerry homage there. I don't know. And in fact, my predecessor, a very brilliant guy named John Palfrey, was like, this is nuts. Like, we're not buying these books anymore. And then we're like, okay, now we have an incomplete collection. Already that's kind of like lying awake at night. My collection is incomplete. But the collection has got to be the means, not the ends. Now, it might be a vague means, if you can think of somebody who might need it someday rather than just who needs it now. But our thought was, well, what if we digitize this stuff? Because it turns out there is not an authoritative, citable, freely available, pegged to a single URL online version of the law of this country as represented through its cases. That's weird. That's weird. That should not be the case. And it's one of those things that we kind of nod at. Yeah, it probably shouldn't be the case. But I've got access through my library, or, I don't know, the Republic still stands, or do you really need to read that case? Surely someone can tell you that you shouldn't litter. I mean, there's all sorts of ways in trying to rationalize it, but it really profoundly doesn't make sense. So we have undertaken a pilot project of actually yanking this stuff out of the depository, and then we gather the books. These are some of the early New York reports, and then I'd like to say that no books were harmed in this demonstration, but there is actually a guillotine that chops, I know there's like, ah! It's like somewhere a million voices cried out as one, and then we're stilled. It's like, I'm sorry, Princess Leia, the book planet is gone. But the guillotine chops off the spine of the book, and we do have a special collections coordinator who intercedes. She can like kind of grant a reprieve for a particularly interesting physical object. But for the run-of-the-mill stuff, we send it through this incredibly high-speed scanner. I mean, this is like the Cookie Monster of book scanning. You'd like just plop the book that's just been newly guillotined onto one side, and if you blink, you miss it. The whole thing is scanned quite nicely, one side and the other. And the idea is to ultimately digitize it and OCR it and make it available to the world for free. So far, it's about 43,000 volumes of American law across all jurisdictions. We've done about 7,500 of them. That's 7 million pages out of about 42 million, and some primary jurisdictions that we've already covered. And we'll see what we can do with it. Of course, it also lights a useful fire under us to think about how we would get law going forward. It's one thing to have said, okay, now we've done it, but it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge, or as Brewster does, crawling the web for an archive purposes. As soon as you're done, it's time to make the donuts again because stuff has changed. And for that, this is a good example of the Internet's distributedness metaphorically being helpful. There are libraries across the nation and the world, each of whom is familiar with the courts and other activities within its jurisdiction. Together, we actually can make many hands of light work. Many hands make light work, and be able to, one jurisdiction at a time, arrange, as it must be in a federalist system, the bespoke kinds of protocols so that going forward, the Circuit Court of X county can be able to provide its opinions born digital into the collection that we can then use. Now, of course, within libraries, we're not just looking at primary sources such as law that is 99.9 copyright free, but we're also thinking about scholarship and getting access to scholarship, and that gets back to the transformation from a lot of shelving with books to lots of terminals lined up. And the subscription model for these journals is, at least in the view of many of the consumers, broken. And that's something we have to take on as a real problem. If you look at how much cereals have cost next to the Consumer Price Index since 1986, you can see that's the basic basket of goods like a Big Mac. And this is cereal expenditures, which is growing much, much faster. These charts courtesy of Stuart Schieber at the Harvard Open Access Project. And you can see, for instance, Reed Elsevier's historical profit margin, bless it, as being pretty much at 30% and now pushing 40%, which is a pretty good business. 40% profit margin, that's like There are people running grocery stores that should stop immediately and see if they can get into this business. Of course, it's not an easy business to get into, which in turn is why the profit margins look as they do. Now, I don't begrudge that, but what it does say is there may be an opportunity here to have some surplus go to the consumer, especially when the materials in question are generated en bloc by the consumers themselves. This is not gold mined out of somewhere and then offered to hungry gold consumers. That metaphor didn't work, did it? But it's stuff that is the fruit of a mind that gets sent into a journal for which then that mind and fellow minds must pay. And as an author who has often had to negotiate for the right to put my own work on my website, that's another one of those things that, like, if it wasn't already true, it seems hard to believe we would make it up, and yet there it is as the status quo. Just a little bit more prepping of the ground here. If you look at subscription prices for commercially offered journals and nonprofit journals, nonprofits are true to their names in the sense of not apparently making as much profit. They are charging much less per page across field, and if you look at a price per citation kind of metric, again, the commercial journals are charging much more. Again, they have a different core purpose. We shouldn't be surprised or begrudge them that, while still asking systemically, well, what else are they bringing to the table that the nonprofits aren't that might make it as a consumer something for which you'd be grateful to see your extra dollars at work? Now, in law, we have a little bit of an advantage, and that's why on this chart, for example, you can say the average price per title on online journals is actually quite low. I feel really bad for the chemistry people who are paying almost $4,000 per title. Law is down at $565, in part because most of our titles are coming from nonprofit organizations. But thinking about the balance between profit and nonprofit in a healthy ecosystem has got to be part of any examination of solving the problems that we see among us. I was struck by this article from Canada where the Research Council of Canada, they're saying innovation is not valuable unless it has commercial value. And that's why the NRC's, basically their NSF's research focus is going away from discovery science solely to research commercially viable stuff. And I would love to see some bastions within academia that don't necessarily have commercial viability as the metric for whether this is worthy research to be done, to be contributed, or to be purchased back if you're trying to learn something. Now, what's the scene looking like for journals? It's actually quite dynamic. It is changing quickly. So, for example, think of it almost like Moore's Law, where the number of transistors on a chip has been doubling every 18 months. In mathematics, there's about 2 million papers written in the field of mathematics, although I haven't updated the statistic recently, and that means it's stale, because half of those papers have been published in the last 10 years. If you look at the curve, this is a doubling of the number of mathematics papers. There must be a mathematics paper about the number of mathematics papers, and at which point there will be more papers than there are people. So where do the papers go? Into roughly 100,000 academic journals, keeping a little bit with our math example, nearly 5,000 of them in math. If you are a diligent mathematician, how do you choose not what even paper to read, but if you still buy into the bundling effect of the journal, going back to Filtrans A, how do you pick what journals to read when there are nearly 5,000 of them? And this is even a problem that Wikipedia has tried to take up as it has debated whether or not the mere existence of an academic journal is enough to make it worthy of a Wikipedia page about the journal. So Wikipedia is kind of worried about running out of room for talking about journals. And there was this comment in the discussion about whether a journal has to actually do something notable or merely exist. Here's the comment: I would no more delete an article on an obscure academic journal than I would an article on a small village where nothing had ever happened. It's a weird comment. It makes me wonder if they're wanting to delete the article on the journal or not. But it's just showing the profusion of stuff. And some may know Jeffrey Beall. who has a list of what he calls predatory publishers, people who hang out the shingle as a journal, charge the author a fee to get published, generally seem to publish everything that gets a check cleared for, and then they say they're done. And by his tracking, in 2011, there were only 18 such publishers. By 2014, a number of grocery stores appear to have shut down and instead are becoming predatory publishers. So you have 477. And if you actually look at the list, it's like stuff generically, eponymously titled so that it looks like a real journal, indistinguishable from others. The idea that we have like an SEO or spam problem among academic journals is the kind of thing that makes you be like, really? Really? Like, how did this happen? At least we start turning to others then to help us figure out which journal is the right journal to buy or to consult for something. So we're trying to make search the way to fix the profusion of the journals. This is a note that went out to the editorial team of a new journal. And here's what it says. With a new editorial team, we are now looking forward to perhaps the most significant event in the life of a journal, submission for our first impact factor. I did not expect the sentence to end that way. According to our publisher, we already have a pseudo-impact factor of 0.5 and a ranking of 35 out of 47 in public administration and 50 out of 72 in communication. We are therefore in a strong position to make a formal application for a non-pseudo-impact factor. For a young multidisciplinary journal, that is already good news, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is the kind of thing that's like teaching to the test, as best I can tell, gone awry. But you can understand in an ocean like that, to get noticed, if we presume, as I think is the case for this particular journal, this is a good journal with good people working for it, good people editing it, and yet it's still somehow having to get up that page rank wherever the ranking is done, in this case with ISI. It is a strange world indeed where the quant has beat out the qual. Now, I adverted to the fact that law reviews are much cheaper, and that's, of course, because, open secret, they are run by students. In law, our primary journals are not peer-reviewed, and they are run by students. There, I said it. It went out over Fuse. I can't take it back, and bless it. Here's, for instance, writing an article for a law review for me. Some students write me, would you like to write a law review article for us? And I say, why, that's a capital idea. I give them the article. They come back with some suggestions, which are quite good suggestions. I make the suggestions, most of them, and then they publish the article, and everybody's happy. And hopefully it is among articles above median, because the median number of readers of a law review article is 0. Okay. So there's some of the students. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate the help. We're done. And there are some issues with this, to be clear, because they have to make decisions about what to publish. Here's a really interesting study done by Leah Christensen and Julie Osade on the subject, where they interviewed students about how they pick what to publish and how much they were influenced by where the author teaches. You would think a factor that shouldn't be material to the quality of the work, to judging the quality of the work that the professor has put in front of the journal. A number of them say they are influenced, and one admitted that they got an article the editors liked very much from a non-elite law school. After much debate, they couldn't, quote, take a chance on that professor's law school. They received an article in the same field from a professor in an elite school that they thought inferior, but they accepted it anyway. That doesn't sound very good. But really, they're dealing with the sheer number of submissions. Several editors from top 50 law schools receive between 1,500 and 2,000 articles per year. So again, kind of a spam issue going on a little bit. But now let's look at the non-law side of things. As was mentioned, I teach in computer science as well. Here's a computer science kind of publishing thing. They write to me, would you like to submit an article to our computer science journal? Sure, why not? I submit it. Pretty briskly, right? 19 April they ask. I reply by the 31st of May. In September, I'm like, hello, how's my article doing? I haven't heard anything. They write me back 10 days later, and they say, It has completed the review process. The editor-in-chief has decided it needs major revisions before it can be considered for a second review. Please submit them by the 6th of October. All right, so I've got a week to do my major revisions. I pull a few all-nighters and resubmit it, getting an extra weekend at the end, give it to them on the 9th of October. We wait till December while they think about it, and I get news. And here's the news. This is from the comments I am permitted to see from the reviewer. What do you see as this manuscript's contribution? There is none. Public comments. These will be made available to the author. The author should have withdrawn the manuscript rather than wasting our time. I'd like to think that not just their time was wasted in that exercise. And there ought to be ways to think about the process that goes from the sort of our cup runneth over on the law side, and the food is bad and the portions are small on this side of things. It's kind of like that guy from Phantasm that just sends the ball after you to leech you of your life. Not great to get those kinds of reviews. But I think in some ways we, the beleaguered authors, get our last laugh when it was announced in February that big publishers, IEEE, frankly, the organization that I had the contretemps with, IEEE, why am I protecting their identity, right? They did it. IEEE and Springer are found to have published more than 120 gibberish papers. Now, maybe that should make me feel bad because my paper was worse than gibberish. It's like a stopped watch that is right at no time of day. But, I mean, these are seriously gibberish papers generated by a computer, a fun thing called SideGen. You can go on the web. Some MIT people made this for fun and to troll these journals to show just how unselective they were. And so I went to SideGen, and I was able to generate in about 5 seconds BIELID, a methodology for the improvement of rasterization, a perfectly well descripted and footnoted paper that is complete and utter gibberish. I know, I was tempted to submit that again to the IEEE, but I can't because it turns out that somebody has finally done the SideGen paper detector, and in its public announcement, trying to lower the furor over all of this, Springer said in their press release, we will henceforth be putting all submissions through this SideGen generated paper detector so you can rest easy. Somehow it feels to me like treating the symptom rather than the problem. Again, one of these things in full view, thousands of gibberish papers published in academic journals that cost a lot of money. Something is very broken with our system, which is one reason why just maybe publishing direct to the web may have its benefits. That's something I did with a paper called Spam Works, and it's, I think, the paper that's gotten the most number of views and reads of anything I've done, actually. And I just put it up on SSRN, and it's been doing quite happily there. But that's just a form of giving up on this entire thing. So for this riff, really what I'm suggesting is the libraries have an amazing role to play in trying to help establish the line between that which counts as a reasonable thing prima facie to consult and that which is out in the ocean. If a researcher wants to go for it, go for it. But is there some initial line drawing that can be done lest the rest of us be overwhelmed truly by the amount of stuff out there that is intentionally being placed out there for spammy or search engine optimization purposes? It's a real battle out there. It's not just there's a lot of stuff I don't know what to read. It's there's a lot of stuff of zero value by any metric that is vying to somehow grab our attention. And when I look at the top law reviews as listed, say, by Washington and Lee, they're all student-run law reviews. These students are totally eager for guidance about how to improve their process. And I look at any given law library and say, you know, around these tables we could even have law faculty gathering with the students synchronously. Make it a pizza party as they are dealing with those 1,200 submissions, and over the course of a day or two, really try to dig into the scholarship that is seeking to find attention and to see that which has really got a little bit of magic to it and should be promoted. This kind of nice, almost stock photo of Randy Kennedy at Harvard being like, hello, I know a lot. That's exactly what I want to see in the library as, say, the students come for consultation. Now, there's also the issue of freely disseminating what we know. And that's what starts to drive us towards solving the link and reference ROP problem. Because even once you've drawn that line between what's out there in the world and what is worthy of finding, we need to be able to keep that which is especially worthy of finding preserved forever. If I take my spam paper and I just throw it out on the web somewhere, what if I move institutions and then it goes down from where it is? It's no longer in a systematic structure of knowledge of the sort that libraries put behind their portculli. And that's where we start to think about how to organize knowledge if we're going to freely disseminate it, distribute it, but still keep it so that the most important stuff can be locatable trivially forever. And the last application I wanted to mention before I talk about PERMA, which of course is our joint venture on that front, is just what we're trying to do with the casebook. Casebook, another example of a $250 item containing about 80% public domain material, and yet the professor doesn't pay it, so who cares? Well, we should care about that, and also make it so that that which is sort of just in a big lump, there's a case starting in the middle of a page, is disaggregable, kind of like a playlist of music. So that if I'm teaching a course, why not be able to arrange the syllabus as the materials, not just the pointer to them, and then if I'm teaching another version or another professor is teaching a different version, she can consult my list and rearrange it, add in a case here, take out a case there, and we might see them evolve much more organically than in the sort of 12th edition block gets dropped from heaven and 3 authors the way that it is right now. That's what the H2O system is that we've built. And within the cases that we draw upon for these case books, we actually allow the professor to make annotation, and we allow the professor to cut stuff out, like with that ... And if you click on the ... you can see exactly what you're missing, because here we have canonical versions of the original cases, and any edits made to them are merely overlays upon the case. No case text is harmed when a case is edited. And that means that a student reading it or a fellow faculty member considering using that case can re-edit it and have everything still visible, which is treating the case, I think, with the respect that it deserves, because the judge who wrote it surely thought that pretty much every word was needed. It's a way of making the materials be as flexible as they can be. And then once you've got a universe of such edits to cases, you get something like this, a heat map. Here's Vosburgh versus Putney, deployed across multiple syllabi. And then you can see everybody included this line. That's why it's dark red. Nobody included that line, which could give you a guidance in what everybody is thinking about how they're editing, as easy as mouse droppings off of their mouse. It's not like somebody had to sit down and say, I'm a casebook editor. We are all casebook editors as we're just preparing our materials for class. So just on that, to let you know where that stands, there are about 40 law faculty accounts across 14 schools, about 8,000 playlists of that sort, including nested playlists, and over 4,000 cases in it, courtesy of Fastcase, which has been helpfully providing us with these materials. And of course, we look to draw them from the Free the Law project as well. But you still need to be able to know that those materials, whether used for a casebook or invoked in an opinion or in a scholarly article, will remain freely available at the end of a URL forever. And the closest, I think, we've gotten before any of the efforts here are taken into account is something like Google Scholar, where you punch something in and you search, and Google Scholar says, here is the most relevant answer to your search, and you can trust Google to have the Churchill War Papers, at least in limited preview, available indefinitely. But I start to worry about indefinitely and infinitely not meaning the same thing, and I'm well aware of the great incident that many of you are aware of, in which when the first Kindle came out, somebody started selling through Amazon a 99-cent version of 1984 because it's not in copyright in North America. and then realized they were wrong. It's in copyright in the US, just not in Canada. That's unfortunate. It ideally would have been the other way around, but instead it wasn't. And you can imagine Amazon having a litter of kittens about statutory damages for contributory or even direct infringement for having sold this thing to which they did not have rights at 99 cents a pop with maybe $300,000 of damages per thing. So they not only stopped selling it, that was a foregone conclusion, but they reached into every single Kindle that had 1984 and deleted 1984 off that Kindle. Like, it just disappeared from your Kindle. And it's hard to think of a more appropriate book to which this could happen. You don't have 1984. You never had 1984. There's no such book as 1984. And it's not just the on-off of do I have the book or don't I, but the integrity of the text itself. So on a particularly boring weekend, I was reading War and Peace on my Nook, and I encountered this passage. As soon as she heard his voice, a vivid glow nooked in her face, lighting up both. What? When the flame of the sulfur splinters nooked by the tinder burned up. All right, 2 is a trend. So let's search for Nook. The word Nook appears throughout War and Peace. Now, I don't discount the prevision of Tolstoy, but that just doesn't make sense. Anybody have a theory? Kindle. Every place the word Kindle appeared in War and Peace had been replaced by the word Nook in what is arguably the worst product placement ever. So bad that it's probably an accident that it had already been prepared for the Kindle and had some wrapper material advertising our other Kindle books, and just to make sure they didn't offend Barnes & Noble, they did a global search and replace to make sure they got every last one, and they did. But this gets to the integrity of the information. When it is so protean, because it's digital and online and centralized, there is the court order, there is the accident, there is the nefariousness. That means we cannot even trust that what we're reading is what the person wrote. And that's really, when Michelle was giving the broad definition of reference rot, worse than the 404 is the, yes, here's the White House press release that was linked to in that article, but the press release, which has happened, has been retroactively edited with no sign that it has. And at that point, you could see the reader saying to the author, what are you talking about? The president never said that. And now we're having to have an argument over what the official White House site said the president said. That is not so great. That's what brings us to contributing actively and fiercely to the development of free information platforms. Something that academia has done before. Creative Commons came out of academia and to this day has had a huge impact on facilitating people who want to share their stuff, able to share their stuff. And it really brings us then to some scholarship of the sort that Sarah Rhodes did, describing the Chesapeake Project, and trying at least to get a handle on how big a problem is it that the fact that our library, for most intents and purposes as humanity, is the web, how important is it that that remains stable, and how stable is it? And the Chesapeake Project's answer, which you'll hear more about today, is it's not clear how stable it is. And the answer from this wonderful work by Rizal Liebler and June Liebert is, my Lord, you look at these Supreme Court opinions that are, as part of the law, citing for both example and for sourcing that which has come before. You follow the link. In many cases, it's not working. And they'll tell you more about it. Rizal, I know, is here. We were very curious about this at the same time. I don't even think we knew that Rizal's good work was going on. But we ended up finding that if you look not just at did my computer bonk with a can't find server or 404 error, different errors to be sure, but it really isn't, when a human eye beholds it and looks at it carefully, not what the author was clearly meaning to cite to anymore. That's the reference rot piece. We found half of the links in Supreme Court opinions from 1789 to the present. In fairness, they didn't start using them until 1995, are dead, are gone, are wrong. That's worrisome. And it's funny that it's both something people treat casually, well, what are you going to do? And then it's interesting, as we've started to talk about solutions, those who are looking at the solutions are suddenly like, how can I be assured that PERMA, say, will be there forever? I'm like, 10 minutes ago, you didn't even think there was a problem, and half of your links are broken. Now, all of a sudden, we need to be Fort Knox? Okay, we can be Fort Knox. But it's very interesting how it's the frame. Once you start fixing it, you really want to fix it because you realize how big the problem is. Before you start, it's just a feature of the landscape. One wonderful example that's been bouncing around has been from this opinion from 2010, Brown versus Entertainment Merchants Association, in which a concurrence by Alito included a link to a gaming site that was quite material to his view on the thing. If you follow the link today, you get this, 404, aren't you glad you didn't cite to this webpage in the Supreme Court Reporter at Brown v. Entertainment Merchants Association? If you had, like Justice Alito did, the original content would have long since disappeared and someone else might have come along, purchased the domain in order to make a comment about the transience of linked information in the internet age. All right, well, that's somebody that is probably supposed to be reading War and Peace on his weekend rather than doing that. But it gives you a sense of just what a weird loss of control it is, whoever you are, including Supreme Court Justice, to throw a link out to something and then it's not static. You don't know where it's going to go. When you throw a link out to a work in a library, all right, it's a system of things. It's in a book. The book isn't going to change. You have the edition. You might not find it, but if you do, it's what you expected. Very, very different world. And some initial kind of playing around research we've done over the summer. One of our interns, Marcus Commenter, did this with the benefit of data from the Court Listener Project. These are across different varieties of courts, the use of URLs starting in 1992 up to 2014. And of course, there's a lot going on. The data is very noisy because the denominator isn't normalized. But these are 6 U.S. circuit courts, or maybe 5 plus the Supremes, just looking at rot since we did our study. From 2013 year to June of 2014, and already at least one circuit has 14% rot in the opinions in just a matter of no more than a year. So I think it's clearly a problem that is growing, and the people who have come forward to really start dealing with it are doing amazing work. So I think we're going to hear from Herbert von de Sampel today about Memento, which is taking on the block and tackling of creating a vernacular, a protocol, for how to say, this is the URL I'm interested in. I would love to know out in the world where there might be time-stamped archives of it, wherever they may live. Maybe Brewster has it. Maybe it's parked in a perma archive. This is the kind of thing that makes the best of the distributed internet, rather than, well, let's create a Fort Knox. Let's just build a really big building in Oxford that will just store all of the web. Doesn't sound too far removed from the Internet Archive, but the future of the Internet Archive itself should be, let's help them out here. Let's mirror that stuff. Let's jurisdictionally diversify it. To expect Brewster to be shouldering this all with his organization is, in my view, somewhat taking advantage of just how committed and genial Brewster is about this. But this is something that should be distributed nicely among many people, not just held by a single atlas. So you're going to hear more about Memento. I won't say more here about that. Let me tell you a little bit about how we started thinking about PERMA, on which the ribbon was cut, I think almost exactly 1 year ago today. And the idea behind PERMA was first to make it distributed. So this is a list of our over 60 partners who comprise the project that is PERMA. Many of them, most of them, law school libraries, but including such things as the Internet Archive, with the ultimate idea being that what we will store forever can be mirrored among many or all of these libraries, and it also means that any entity that is generating links through an opinion, through scholarship, that wants to be the primary custodian of it. A court may not trust the libraries to keep them alive, even though they were trusting the organic web to keep them alive last week. But okay, we'll have you set up a PERMA server in the basement of the Supreme Court. Let that be the authoritative one. And then if you like, at the right time, these libraries will stand ready to mirror your server and be able to serve up what you are storing at those locations as the artifact of what was at that source you cited that we can know that's what the justice meant when she cited to that site. So the basic idea on PERMA is anybody can come and create a PERMA link, which is to say one or more of the libraries will take a snapshot in multiple formats of what is currently at that link and say, okay, this is what we saw in addition to what the author or PERMA user saw. Store it within the library network, create a link that is a literally perma.cc link, and that link can be placed instead of, or more commonly at first, alongside of the original link to the material in the citation or the text of either the opinion or the scholarly work or whatever. Now, just creating it, though, doesn't invoke the library's promise of forever. We as libraries and as creatures of Leviathan in our own way, we don't want to just be storing vacation photos so readily, and then it's like, this is part of our collection, you may not have these vacation photos back. We want to have an extra step that we call vesting, by which that which has been created is then said, yes, we really mean it, we're locking it down, this is part of an official citation in a piece of scholarly work or in a judicial opinion. And we have made it so that libraries are registrars. Almost any library can apply to be a registrar who can decide in turn how to allocate vesting privileges, and then vesting privileges can be spread among faculty, among publishers, journals, to courts, or even courts can be registrars who in turn can allow vesting. It's a light way of making it so that the libraries don't feel they're in for a penny, they're in for a pound with anybody vesting anything the way that a typical internet startup would do it. On the other hand, a typical internet startup can't credibly, truly guarantee forever the way that libraries think in very long terms. The utility of it, I think, is quite important. I look at, this was nasa.gov right before the government shutdown last October. This was nasa.gov after the shutdown. And whatever you think of it, like there were papers at nasa.gov in citations that the world couldn't get to because Congress was having its fight. That is weird, especially because it's not like hamsters have to run faster on wheels to serve up papers. But don't get me started on that. But this is, if PERMA is used as a link instead, okay, we can still get to the stuff through PERMA, even as you would think a source as canonical as the U.S. government should never need it. Here it is, ready to be benefiting from that kind of archiving. We've had some uptake. Here's the Michigan Supreme Court starting to use systematically permalinks in its opinions. Harvard Law Review now, along with I think over 100 other journals, starting to put permalinks in, archived at, so that you can always get to whatever these things may be. And most of the time, these things are not just other scholarship, which technically still exists systematically. You can pull the book out of some library and get it, but rather solely and only on the web, which is all the more reason to see it as an important thing to do. You can't count on the traditional library system as a backdrop. When you click on the permalink, you can go to a landing page, which lets you see the live view. It's not meant to take away hits on the destination site, but if the live view isn't what you expect, you're then in a possible mode to see the other archived pieces of that. And each one is author or creator specific. There might be a bunch of views of the New York Times homepage, each created for the sake of a citation or other invocation at the time. It's not like this is the New York Times. It's this author saw that New York Times at that time. Growth of the project starting last October. These are the number of peer libraries steadily growing up to about 60. Here is the number of links within the PERMA system. We now have about 25,000 unvested links and another 21,000 vested links. The dark archive, which are sites that if the robots.txt at a destination site which says keep out Google, keep out other crawlers, we don't keep out because we're not a crawler, but we use that as a rough proxy to say this site may not want a ready copy of it displayable, so we won't. You'll click on a permalink to something that's dark archived, it will say, sorry, you can't see this with one click, but it is on file with the library. Talk to the librarian and we can arrange to get you access, if you need it, the traditional way that libraries do their services. How much storage do these 50,000 links amount to? That's right, we're up to a full 90, count them, 90 gigabytes. So if anybody has an extra thumb drive or two, you could easily house the PERMA project as much as it is. A great example of like, wow, the real challenges to this are institutional, are interpersonal as far as what's the right way to do this, how can we draw everybody in, rather than necessarily technical. So that's sort of PERMA by the numbers right now. I won't read down the list. I've already given you most of it. But to me, it's what we're doing, I sense. Almost everybody here and online, we are driven intrinsically to want to see this stuff work. The world will be a better place if it does. And we have to be in the reality-based community. It has to pay for itself. There's all sorts of trade-offs that have to be made, like the dark archive, for example, to be, I think, appropriately respectful of the desires of publishers. But it's different from the kind of extrinsic thing that says, we're a supermarket, but our margins are low. What should we do tomorrow? I know, let's get into the link-saving business. That makes it more of a means than an ends. And for something as crucial as this, I think that the extrinsic motivation is the way to go. Let me close with almost the opposite problem. The first problem we're thinking with PERMA and link and reference rot and the other things you're going to hear about today is how to save stuff that might otherwise wither away, but that has been intended for public access, was originally shared with the public widely on the web. This is a story of the opposite, something that was not made to be shared widely, but was still important to store for the future. And that's the story of the Burns Library at Boston College, where a project was started by some researchers where they interviewed people who had participated in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And through this project, they got people to agree to interviews who had never spoken before with the promise that they would not release the text of the interviews until those people died. And so that's how you had somebody named Brendan Hughes answer the question, do you have a problem with committing this to a secret tape to be used only after you've died? I don't have a problem with that. If I did, I wouldn't be talking. A lot of what I'm saying on trust. I've never, ever, ever admitted to being a member of the IRA. Never. And I've just done it here. He then died, which is how we have his answer to the question. It got published in a book called Voices from the Grave, which not only several people interested in the Troubles read, but the Northern Ireland and British Constabulary read and could not wait for the next edition. So they sued, using a letter rogatory through the U.S. State Department, to get Boston College to kick out the rest of the stuff, whether or not people have died, for the purpose of investigating murders that may have been admitted to on the tapes and for which there's no statute of limitations. That led to appeals up and down from the First Circuit in Boston, which Boston College consistently lost. There is no recognized donor library privilege of the sort that might be recognized between doctor-patient or lawyer-client or spouses. That gets us thinking about, could we be using some interesting tools to permit donations of papers under time capsule encryption? That even the library can't get to the materials until certain conditions are met. Time has passed or some other event has happened in the world, and then and only then do the keys become available. This might even mean that you could put the contents into encrypted, a mirrored public repository. Put them at the Internet Archive. Create a permalink to it. You click on the link, what you see is a bunch of encrypted stuff, which means nothing to you until the key is disgorged. You could see Supreme Court justices donating not just their papers, but all of their email traffic. There's much more that could be donated now. It would be of great interest 50 or 100 years from now. Right now, I suspect it's mostly getting deleted because you can't count on a secret staying a secret. Technologies like this can show that what the libraries are really in the business of is in storing over the long now the stuff that humanity needs to understand itself, to constitute itself, not just reconstitute itself, and to keep secret and private that which is donated under those conditions, and to ensure that that which is invoked publicly is done. We are the ones to do it. It reminds me of Randall Munroe's wonderful XKCD cartoon. Are you coming to bed? I can't. This is important. What? Someone is wrong on the internet. And I think what we'll be emphasizing today is that something is wrong on the internet. Its wonderful distributed character means that there are huge chunks of it where the integrity and the permanence are not only questionable, but demonstrably off-kilter. And we're leaning on it, and we need to shore it up. And we are the ones, truly, who can do it in the best spirit of the Internet and the web. Thank you very much.